Was The Wizard of Oz the very first movie ever shot in color? No, not even close. Attempts to make full color films have been around since basically the dawn of the medium, but they weren't always easy or cost effective. Before color could be processed in camera, many early filmmakers were experimenting with ways to add it in after the fact. This could involve stencils or chemical tinting, or in some cases, hand painting every single frame. This was obviously super time consuming and expensive and could only be justified for very short films. The first successful color process was Kinemacolor in 1906, which was a two-color additive process. This basically means that black and white film was shot through alternating red, orange, and blue-green filters, and then projected through an additional red-green filter. It was very technically complicated. Kinemacolor required special cameras and projectors to even be usable, which is not practical enough to set a new industry standard. Technicolor entered the scene in the late 1910s and would transform the industry's relationship with color through four different processes. Process one was a lot like Kinemacolor in that it was a two-color additive process. Unlike Kinemacolor, it used a prism beam filter to project the two colors onto every frame instead of alternating. This was a huge step forward, but there were still a lot of issues with practicality because it still required a separate projector and projectionist. Technicolor's second process, which was introduced in 1922, was a subtractive process instead of an additive one. The two colors were exposed on separate film strips and then combined and toned in post-production. And since the color was present in the reel itself, this completely nixed the need for separate projectionists. But process 2 still had its fair share of technical issues, like the fact that the two strips couldn't be exactly in focus at the same time, and that the images tended to bulge and warp after multiple screenings. Process 3, which was introduced in 1928, addressed many of these issues. The in-camera process was basically identical, and it has a very similar look to process 2, but new lab techniques were utilized to create more consistent and high quality and durable projection prints that were also compatible with sound technology. Process 4 was introduced in the 1930s, and this is probably what you think of when you hear the word Technicolor. All of the processes I mentioned before used two color filters, but this one used three, which introduced a whole new range of vibrant and lifelike colors. Wait, so is that where the misconception comes from? Is this what The Wizard of Oz was the very first to use? Again, no. The first full-length feature film shot in three-strip Technicolor was actually Becky Sharp in 1935. That's 4 years earlier. But why do so many people seem to think that The Wizard of Oz was the very first color film? My best guess is that it's beautiful and iconic and a lot more famous today than a lot of these other examples I mentioned, but I would still recommend looking into other early color films. They have such a unique look and showcase a whole new side of an era that a lot of us usually associate with like monochrome tones. And if you don't feel like watching them, if it's not your thing, you could at the very least like stop just saying whatever on the internet. Google is free, my friends. This information is not very hard to find.